Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad and today we're going to be continuing our journey in exploring EF Core and Postgres. Although the feature that we're going to be implement currently we're implementing on Postgres, but most of them will work with any other database provider, MySQL, SQL Server, Azure SQL DB, so on and so forth. So, if you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. It will really help the channel. Now, let's jump into it.
So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is how we can actually rename the table. The first thing we're going to be doing is we need to go into the Visual Studio where we actually have our tools installed, and what we're going to be doing here is, let me refresh this so we make sure we are on the latest version. And if I zoom in, you can see that, for example, the table's name is driver media, F1 drivers and team. So let's see, for example, if I want to change the name of F1 drivers to, for example, F1 2022 drivers, for example. So let's see how we can do that. Let me zoom out a bit. And in order for us to accomplish this, what we need to do is we need to go to our API DB context. And inside our API DB context, we're going to be utilizing the onModel creating method. And basically the onModel creating method, it will allow us to override the connections, or basically it will allow us to override the default implementation that Entity Framework have in order for us to add more functionality to it. It's going to be called Fluent APIs. So inside our driver class, inside our model builder within the onModel creating method, what we need to do is we need to write the following. So entity, which is referred to the table itself, to table, and then here we're going to specify whatever name we want. So for example, I could call it F1 2022 drivers, for example, and all I need to put a semicolon at the end. And once I put the semicolon, the first thing that I need to do in order for me to see that changes in my database is I need to create a migration. And basically a migration is going to be the translation of the code from C# into something which SQL is going to understand. So I'm going to put .NET and then EF, which stands for Entity Framework. And then I'm going to say migrations, which is the action within Entity Framework that I want to do. And then I'm going to put add, because I'm adding a new migration. And then here, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be giving it a name. I'm going to say rename table. I'm going to say rename driver table, for example. And I'm just going to click on enter. So what's going to happen right now is the actual source code is going to be building, and then once it builds, we're going to have a new migration script, and that migration script is ready for us to actually implement it and actually implement those changes to our database. So first of all, let us come here into our Solution Explorer and let's check this, and we can see here that we already have a method called rename table, which is going to rename our table from F1 driver to F1 2022 drivers. So let's go back here to our terminal. Let's clear this and let's implement those changes into our database. And basically we need to utilize an Entity Framework code command, which is going to be database update. So .NET EF database update. And before we run this command, let us understand what it does here. In essence, the Entity Framework database update command is going to look into all of the migrations files. It's going to basically scan through them. It's going to check which of these migration has been applied or not. And based on that, it's going to apply the pending migrations. So let us implement this right now. So let's click on enter. And once we have clicked on enter, we can see that the build has started, and we can see that the work has been done, and we got a done at the end. So right now, if I go back to Postgres and I refresh, and if I zoom in a bit, we can see here that my table's name has been updated from F1 driver to F1 2022 drivers. Perfect. So that's the first item that we wanted to cover today, is actually how we can utilize Entity Framework to rename the table. So the second item is what we want to cover is how we can actually add comments to our table, and that's very important. Specifically, if someone, for example, like a DBA is trying to manage our database, it's really good for them to see the comments on our table to understand what does this table do. So let's see how we can implement that. So again, within the driver tables, so if we want to add a comment, it's going to be very simple. All we need to do is Since we already did that on the drivers table, I think it's only fair to do it for the F1 teams table. So let's do that for the teams. So here we're gonna put model builder dot entity, and we're gonna be updating the team dot without changing the name for it. Let's put has comment, and basically we need to specify the comment here, and we're gonna say this table is for the F1 teams to manage their season. I don't know, something like that. And to be fair, let's give it also here like a comment. We're gonna put entity dot has comment, and we're gonna give it the same. We're gonna say this is a table for F1 drivers. As simple as that. So now we can see here that we have added the comments in two different ways. So the first way is actually basically attaching the has comment on the entity itself within the driver. On the other one is basically we utilize the model builder dot entity with the team as well. Then we have attached the comment. So again, if we're gonna do the same thing, we need to go through the migrations, and then we need to update the database. And this migration, we're gonna call it adding comments. So .NET EF migrations adding comments to table, and now this is building. Perfect. And now after it builds what we need to, and the migration has been added, let us check it here, and we can see here that it's very simple. The command, it altered the table and it attached comments to them. Now let us actually implement it into our database, and if you said we need to do database update, that's the correct answer. So it's going to be .NET EF database update, and let's do enter. And perfect, we can see that has been completed, and now if we open it through our DB management tool, we can see the comments there. Great. So now that we have added a comment in general on the actual table, let's see if we are able to actually add comments to the column itself. So that's another good feature. So it's not only we're adding a comment on the actual and the full table, let us add a comment on the actual column so we can explain what does this column do. And again, this is going to be very simple, because everything that we're going to be doing right now is going to fall into the Fluent API, or we're going to utilize the attribute. We're just going to jump between them. And because right now we are in the API DB context, let us keep using the Fluent API. So let us go to our API DB context. And let's say here inside my, for my drivers, I want to give a comment on the, for example, let's say the driver's number. I want to add any comment on the driver's number column. So let's see how we can do that. So all we need to do is, let's say entity dot property, and I'm gonna specify the property here. I'm gonna say dot property or driver number, I think, racing number. And then all I need to do after that is dot add, or it's gonna be comment, let's see, has comment, and then I'm gonna provide the comment. And here, for example, this is the designated driver number unique. This is the designated unique driver's number. Okay, so that's one way of doing it here. So let's do it again here for the teams. So after this, what we can do is we can just say dot property, and we can put, again, we need to specify which property. And for this, I'm just gonna choose, I don't know, let's choose name. And then here we're gonna put has comment again, and we need to specify the comment that we want for this. And we can say, let's say this is a sample comment for a column. Okay, that should be fine. Now again, what we need to do is we need to create a migration, and then we need to update the database similar to what we have done previously. So it's going to be .NET EF migrations add, we're gonna say add columns, comments, and enter. Okay, great. And now let's do the actual update on the database. If we said a database update, that's going to be the right answer. So it's going to be .NET EF database update. Perfect. It has been updated. Let's take also a look at the migration scripts. So we can see here that first it altered the column that we wanted and it added the comment to it, which is exactly what we wanted. And similarly to the table itself, it altered it and added the comment. Very simple, straight to the point. So the next item that we'd like to cover here is basically, if we take a look at our models, and we can see here that I have team ID, name, racing number, favorite color, so on and so forth. But what happens if I just want to utilize a property of this, let's say favorite color. I don't want to have a column in the database called or. Let us do a better one. So let's say, for example, I have a new property. I'm going to call it, it's going to be a string, and I'm going to call it name and racing number. And that way, for example, as an example of this, let's make it empty. And an example of this, we can say, for example, Sir Lewis, and we'll put next to it the number 44. So we have Sir Lewis and we have 44. But for example, I only want to utilize this in order for me to concatenate the information coming from name as well as racing number. But I don't want this to have a column inside the database called name and racing number. How can I do that? How can I actually ignore this property when I do any migration, so it will not be propagated to the database? So in essence, this will only be available for me within the C# aspect or within the model itself, but it will not be translated into a column into the database when I do a migration. It's very simple. So basically, if I just want to utilize this inside my database, before we do that, let's see if I have a migration now. Let's see what's going to happen. So let's say .NET EF migrations, and we can say testing columns. I don't know, something like that. And right now, this is gonna work. Oh, so I forgot the word add, see? Now let's try this again. Perfect. So now let's do the database update. Okay, great. Now that I have my database update, so if I go back to Postgres Explorer, and if I zoom in a bit, and I open the F1 drivers table, I can see here that I have name and racing number, but I don't really want to have a name and racing number. All I want to do is have that in my model. I don't want to have it to be reflected in the database. So how can I achieve that? It's very simple. Let us zoom out a bit. And oops, that's a bit much. And now let's go back here and let's go to the drivers. And what I need to do is I need to add a attribute, and all its attribute is gonna say not mapped. And we need to fix the references. And what does this not mapped mean? So whenever entity framework is reading my my models in order for it to decide what's gonna do with it within creating a migration. So when entity framework is reading this model and it's gonna find an attribute to one of the properties called not mapped, entity framework will know, okay, I don't need to worry about this. I don't need to do anything with it. This is not gonna be mapped to me in any shape, way, or form. So I'm just gonna ignore it. On the other hand, if I don't have not mapped, entity framework, we're gonna say, oh look, I have a new property that I have here, which I need to create in the database. But because I have the not mapped attribute, entity framework is gonna decide that it's gonna be ignoring everything there, and basically it's gonna continue as if it doesn't exist. So let's create a migration now and see what's gonna happen when we have the migration. So in the previous migration, we can see that we have added a column, but if we go back, And if we create a new migration now, so .NET EF database, sorry, it's gonna be migrations, add updating columns 2. So this is gonna work. Perfect. Let's take a look right now at our migrations, and we can see here basically it dropped the column. Why did it drop the column? Because we informed it that it's not mapped, and when it compared itself to the database, it said that we have a column there. Because we said it's not mapped, it's decided that it needs to delete the column, which is exactly the right behavior that we want. So now if I just want to implement those changes, I can put .NET EF database update, and let's wait for it until it updates. Perfect, perfect, perfect. And now if I go back here and let me refresh, I can see that the column has automatically been removed from my table just because it did not match the actual, because I added the not mapped attribute. So you might think to yourself, okay, that's great. I have now understand how I can do it from the attribute. Can I do it through Fluent API? And yes, exactly, we can do it from the Fluent API as well. So let's see how we can do that. So let me try to do that for the teams right now. So inside the teams, what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be creating a new property string. I'm gonna say number of, I don't know, points, anything like this. And basically, I don't want to add here the attribute not mapped. I want to make this not mapped through Fluent API. So all I need to do in order for me to access Fluent API, I need to go through the API DB context. And basically what I need to do here is I need to add to the team's properties, or basically the model builder.entity, is I need to add that ignore. So it's going to be something like this. So before the semicolon here, I need to put dot ignore. Actually, ignore, why it's not showing up? Let's check. Dot ignore, and then here I'm gonna specify to ignore, let's say, number of points. So why did it work here but it did not work here? Because when I try to add it after the property value here, the link expression tried to map it to that property itself name. It did not try to map it to the actual table. So be very careful here. The ordering of the Fluent API is very important in how the change is going to be reflected into the database. So first things first, we basically added the dot ignore directly after the comment on the table itself rather than the actual property itself. So right now, let's see how this is going to happen. So we're going to put .NET EF migrations add, we're going to say update underscore column 3. So if we did not have that, we would have in the migration script a new command to create the number of points column. But right now, if we go to the migration itself, we can see it's empty. Because why? Because we have added the ignore, and basically entity framework ignored it, and that is implemented, so there's no harm. So .NET EF database update. And now it's doing the work, and it has done, and basically nothing has been updated into our database, because in essence the Fluent API for the updating of the for the ignoring the column name has automatically worked as expected. Great. So the next step, or the next item that we're going to be taking a look at, is how we can actually change a column name. Not a table name, and actually a column name. And that's very easy. Again, we're going to be utilizing Fluent API to do that. So all I need to do is, for example, let's say I want to update the ID for my driver from ID to driver ID. How can I do that? Inside the driver entity on model builder inside the on model creating method, I can do the following. Entity dot property. I need to specify which property I want. So I'm gonna say the ID property, and I'm gonna put has column name. I'm gonna specify it as team underscore ID. So before we do anything, let us take a look at this. So inside the drivers table here, if I zoom in a bit, we can see that, let me refresh it to make sure that it's not there already. So we can see that the ID is called ID. What we want to do right now is to change this ID into the team underscore ID, which is very simple. So again, let's go back here, let's zoom out a bit. Oops. And basically inside our terminal, we're gonna be adding the following. So it's gonna be .NET EF migrations add. I'm gonna say update underscore column name. Oops. Name. And basically this is gonna create a migration script where we can actually migrate, update the column name. Perfect. Now let's take a look at this migration, and we can see here it's just inside the table name we have rename column, and basically it's renaming from ID to team ID. Actually it should be driver ID. See, that's an issue. So let us update it directly here. Let us remove this migration. So we can remove a migration before we can implement it, and the way we do that, we'll put .NET EF migrations remove, and basically this will delete the last migration that we have. So right now these files we can see have been removed, and right now if I want to add a new migration after I replace team with driver ID, and now what I can do is, let us close this. What I can put is .NET EF migrations add update underscore column underscore name, and then all I need to do right now, let's double check that this is what we wanted, and here we can see that we have driver ID instead of ID. And so the way we implement it is going to be .NET EF database update we can see that this has automatically completed successfully, exactly what we want. Now let's go to Postgres. We can see here is still ID. Let me refresh this, and we can see here, let me zoom in a bit, it has been updated from ID to driver ID, and this is exactly the behavior that we want to achieve. Great. So let us zoom out because it's too zoomed in, and okay, that's too much. The next step that we want to do is, let's see how we can actually implement this, but from within the attributes. So let's go to the teams one, and let's say instead of year, what I want to do is I want to call this, let's say racing year, I don't know, or season year. So how can I do that? Again, I'm going to utilize an attribute. I'm going to put column, and then inside the column, I'm going to give it the name, which is I'm going to put, for example, racing or something like that, racing underscore year. Let us fix this references, and let's save this. And now if we go back to the teams table, we can see here it's called a year. I'm not sure if you can see it. Let me zoom in a bit. We can see here it says a year. So now let us create the migration, and basically within this migration we'll be able to convert it to racing year. So it's going to be .NET EF migrations add, is going to say update underscore column name 2 perfect. And now we're going to say .NET EF database update. Before we do that, let's take another look at the migration just to make sure we are covered. And we can see here that basically it's changing gears to racing gear. And let us do the update. Perfect. Now we can see that this has been completed. If we go back to our Postgres and let us refresh the teams, refresh, and we can see that the column has changed from year to racing gear. Perfect. So here we have seen how we can actually utilize Fluent APIs, as well as how we can utilize attribute in order for us to handle the database tables, to manage them, to basically update them and make them work however we want them to be. So now that this has been done, let's say for example, I want to update the columns order. So for example, let's say I want to have the ID first, name, but I want to have date added, date updated, and then I'm gonna have racing gear and then status. So let's say I wanna have the ability to reorganize the order of my tables. How can I do that? Within Entity Framework, it's very easy to do. So let's take a look. So first things first, let me zoom out a bit because it's too much. What I'm gonna be doing is I need to go back to my code here, and then basically let's close the migrations. Let's go to drivers, for example, and let's say I want to reorganize this. It's very easy. Let's go to our API DB context, and we need to update these ones. So let's make this a bit smaller. And basically what I need to do is I need to give an order. So if we take a look at the driver here, so we can see here that I have the ID, which is inherited from the base entity, and then I have ID, name, racing number, favorite color, so on and so forth. So let's say I wanna have the first thing or the second thing is team ID. Let's say I want the directly team ID and then the name, as we said. So how can I do that? It's gonna be entity dot property, and it's gonna be team ID, and all I need to do here is put x has column order. I need to specify the order, which is gonna be start from 0, 0, 1, let's say 2, and let's do the same thing for the status. So entity dot properties, I want to put the status at the end, so x dot status, and let's see how many columns do we have in it. So if we come here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's gonna be 7 because it starts from 0. We're gonna say dot has column order, and I'm gonna make this as 7. So now what should we do? What should we see here right now is team ID should be the third one in on my table, and the status should be the last one on my table. So let us add a migration. .NET, let's first clear this up because it looks a bit messy. It's gonna be .NET EF migrations add, and we're gonna name this update columns order. Perfect. And now the other one is gonna be .NET EF migrations, .NET EF database update. Perfect. So now if I come here, let me zoom in a bit, and if we refresh this drivers one, let's see, refresh, and we open it, we can see that I have team ID, and then maybe this will not work with Postgres. That's something, I think this will only work with SQL Server, but it's something that to keep in mind whenever you're trying to reorganize this. So apologies for this. This only will work, I think, with SQL Server. It will not work with Postgres. So in this video, we saw different implementations and different way we can actually update and manage our databases and table within Entity Framework. We can see how we can actually implement it through attributes or within Fluent API, which basically we need to update our on model creating. Actually, we need to add inside our API DB context we'll have to add a on model creating method, and from there basically what we do is we need to add a model builder for every entity. So I hope this video helped. Please like, share and subscribe if you like it. It will really help the channel. Have a great day.